Hello, welcome to Oxford Heirlooms. We are about 1 or 2 videos away from being finished with our little day gown, and then we'll start on our little bonnet to go with the day gown. But in the last video, we sewed the neck bias piece to the garment. We also sewed a little button loop with our 1/16 inch ribbon and sewed the button on. So today, along the bottom of the garment, we're going to be preparing the lace that we're going to sew on in just a little bit. So I'm going to start. I'm going to take my entredeaux. Now, if you notice, the seams on my garment are not actually at the ends of the folds. That's because, you know, the pattern pieces were the same size, but we inserted this fancy panel in the front. So the seams are actually kind of folded around on the back, but that's okay. If you just kind of fold it in half like this, we can measure what we need to measure. So I'm going to start about 1 inch away. We'll have about 1 inch of entredeaux, you know, hanging off the bottom hem of my garment. I'm going to come to this right end, then I'm going to fold that in half and bring it up and clip it with my embroidery scissors. And so now I have a piece of entredeaux that is the length of a little bit longer than the entire hem of the garment. Okay, now once again, I have to, since I want to attach my lace to this, I need to prepare my entredeaux. So using my embroidery scissors, I'm going to clip the batiste away very close to the entredeaux ladder without cutting the entredeaux ladder itself. So this will take me a minute to cut this entire length of entredeaux. Okay, so I have trimmed one side of my entredeaux, but before I start sewing my lace to this, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to gather my lace. Since this is gender neutral, you know, and I'm using an ecru lace, I'm going to gather my lace before I attach it. So I'm going to use my fabric marking pen, and I'm going to mark halfway down the edge of my entredeaux. I did that by folding it in half. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to keep my entredeaux folded in half, but I need to cut a piece of lace that is 1.5 times the length of this particular piece of entredeaux. So I'm going to measure the length, or half of the length, 1 time. That gives me a half. I'm going to bring this up to this end, line up my beginning again, come down to the end of my fold, and that gives me 1 whole length right now. And then I'm going to do this 1 more time, and then I'm going to, there's about 6 inches of lace left over here. Let me see if you can see this. So I think what I'm going to do is, normally I would cut it 1.5 times the length, but rather than wasting lace, I'm just going to use my entire 2 yards of lace. Okay, so I'm going to set my entredeaux off to the side for just a minute. And, you know, where I want to line up the halfway mark in my lace with the halfway mark in the entredeaux. So I'm going to take my lace and fold it in half, come to this other end where it's folded in half, and using my fabric marking pen, I'm simply going to mark the lace with my fabric marking pen. That way, when I start to gather the lace up using the technique of pulling the header threads, I can position, or, you know, kind of position this halfway mark halfway down the entredeaux, so I'll have an even amount of gathered lace on one end of the entredeaux and an even amount of gathered lace on the other end of the entredeaux. But I'm going to use my silk pen, and I will do this off of camera because this is a kind of a bad camera angle for me to see the little header thread. But I'm going to use my pen, and I'm going to pull, oh, I got one the first time. joy forever. So I have pulled one gathering thread from the header, and I'm going to begin to gather along the edge of my lace. Okay, now I'm going to set my entredeau from one end to where I can see the halfway mark, and I'm going to gather this lace until half of it is the same length as the entredeau. So that'll take me a minute. Okay, so I have gathered one half of the lace so that the mark in the middle of the lace matches up with the end of the entredeau, and the end of the lace, when I stretch it out, roughly matches up to where I marked in the middle of the entredeau. Now I need to do this to the other end of the lace so that my lace will be the same length as my entredeau. So that will take me a minute to do. Okay, so I've got the other side gathered, and let me show you what I did. At the center, as I was gathering the second side, I went ahead and pinned my two little blue marks together. That made it a little bit easier for me to pull the header thread and gather it so that it's pretty close to exactly the same length as my entredeau. Now I've got my ecru beige thread back in my machine and my bobbin thread. I'm going to set my machine to a zigzag in the right size for sewing lace onto the entredeau, and using the technique of sewing lace to entredeau, I'm going to zigzag this ruffled lace to my entredeau. And as I've mentioned before, for some reason, I'm just in the habit of always having my entredeau on the left and my lace on the right. Let me get my gathering thread out of the way. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to come up under the needle, and I'm going to butt my lace up to my entredeau. I'm going to lower my needle to make sure I'm in the entredeau hole and not piercing it. Let me see if I can zoom in here just a little bit. Oop, going the wrong way. Maybe you can see that a little bit better if I can get that centered. Okay, now I don't use a special lace attaching foot. I just simply use my finger and hold the lace and the entredeau adjacent to one another. And then it will start, and I go slowly because I don't want to miss the lace header and I don't want to stab the entredeau. So this will, I've got, about 44 inches of hemline to do. So this will take me a couple of minutes to do, so I'll be right back. Okay, so I've got my gathered lace zigzag to my entredeau. I will kind of make a little note that since my lace was kind of laying out there crookedy, my two center lines didn't actually match up. They're about an inch apart. And because of that, I ended up with a little bit of extra lace over here at the end of the entredeau. So I'm just going to trim that off and make it even. But, this is Moline lace, so when I sew it onto the entredeau, I really don't have to worry about what's the front side and what's the back side. But as I attach this to the hem of the garment, we're going to have to take great care, because as you can see, on this side of the Moline lace, you can see some of those little fuzzies. Can you see that? And on the other side, the Moline lace does not have little fuzzies. So we'll have to we'll have to pay close attention to that when we sew that to the edge of the garment. But that's what we're doing today. We're preparing our lace. Thank you.